and welcome to another episode of the Paperback Possibility Podcast with me, Ashleigh.
And me, Alfie.
And today we are doing a little bit of a special episode because we are going to be discussing the books that we have read this year so far in 2024. This is the June episode, so we have a fair few books to go. I haven't actually spoken to you about how many books you've read, and it's not really about how many, it's about the quality of the books or the lack of quality, because we're gonna really get into it and we're gonna talk about it now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much everyone for tuning in today, and if you have been a viewer of the podcast or a listener of the podcast before, thank you so much. If you do find that you want to share the podcast with friends, it would really help us out, so please consider doing that. And without further ado, let's get into this month's episode of the Paperback Possibility Podcast. Would you like to start us off, Alfie?
So I have read mostly the only things I've read are the things we've read on the podcast, and I can't even remember what they are at the moment. But I have branched out the last couple months. The two that really stand out to me. Well, I've read 3 books really in the last month, which has been really nice. It's been nice to get away from like the podcast just for a month, just to like get my own reading done. So I've read 3 books in the last month. One of those was an audiobook, which was really good, and those are the 3 that I really want to talk about this episode. The first one is TikTok sensation, since that seems to be an adjective for a book now, which was called The Housemaid, by, do you remember who did it?
Frida McFadden.
Frida McFadden. That was really good thriller. It has some content warnings in it, particularly for like abuse, particularly emotional abuse within a relationship. But ultimately, it's a very good thriller that kept me guessing like basically all the way to the end. It has 2 central characters, but I don't really want to get into too much of the story because the less you know about the story, the better. Ultimately, the concept of the plot is a housemaid gets hired on at this family's house, and she's just got out of prison. Yeah, she needs a job and she gets it with this family, and she can't really leave this job because she's just got out of prison, and she doesn't, and not having a job breaks her parole, so she needs to keep the job. But the problem is that the woman who hires her, the kind of matriarch of the family, is this horrible, angry, messy, very difficult to work with, constantly has mood swings person. And the daughter is just this spoiled, horrible, very difficult to work with child. But she sticks with it because, you know, she has to stay in the job. But the patriarch of the family, the man of the house, is this very attractive man who she very slowly starts to have flirtations with. And that's about as far as I'll take the description of the plot. But it is a really good story because it just really, it doesn't really stop twisting and turning the whole way through it. And I very much felt as I read it that I felt like I knew where it was going to go at the start, and then that quickly was flipped on its head, and then it was flipped on its head again, and then it was flipped on its head again right at the end. And the way it ends is really satisfying. It is part of a series, but I think it's more of an anthology series than actually like a sequel. I've got the next book, which you kindly bought for me.
Yes,
The
I
Housemaid's Secret, which is also Frida McFadden, but it's not about the same characters. It's just about a new character, but I think within the same sort of themes and setting. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, and that was one of the first ones that I read this year.
That's really good. What would you rate it?
I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 5. It was a very easy read, which was really nice. I did find myself skimming through it a lot, which is a good and a bad thing, because it felt very much like a lot of what I didn't really need to pay like full attention to the book to really get everything out of it, which was nice. But at the same time, it's not something that you pick up and you'll finish it and go, oh my god, that was one of the best books I ever read.
Yeah.
But it's like nice, easy thriller, like comfort food, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
Good, I'm glad. That was also the foray for you into paperback books again.
Yeah, so I gave up my Kindle, gave it to you.
Yes.
which I'm very glad about because I was feeling very overwhelmed by the sheer amount of books that I had on my Kindle library and the sort of constant barragement of Kindle deals and Kindle things, and I just really missed holding like a book in my hands and feeling that accomplishment having finished a book. I'm really glad to have done that and made that switch because I'm feeling a lot better about my reading, feeling a lot more in control of everything I'm reading, which
Good, I'm really glad. I have been very much enjoying Alfie's Kindle because he gave me his old one, as he just said, but my Kindle, I worked out, is like 10 years old and it's very slow. So it's very nice to just be able to sit there and actually read. But at the same time, Alfie and I this month went to, or we rediscovered charity shops and books in charity shops. So when we were looking at sort of boosting Alfie's anthology of books and trying to find things that he could read, we went to the charity shops and we found some local ones to us that were doing things like one book for £1, buy one get one free,
yeah.
like the same. So it was really, really good. So we picked up a whole bunch of stuff. So you have got a massive to read.
Yeah, I do have. I still do have a big TBR,
but it's all handheld.
But it's all there. I can see it, and
Yeah.
also what's been really nice is having read those two books. Those two books are now on the bookshelf, and I can see them. And I don't know, maybe it's just a weird thing that I have, but to me, I felt like reading on Kindle was really just killing me a little bit, and just like I was losing my love for reading. And I think the problem was it was very quickly becoming, I wasn't reading to read books, I was reading to complete books, and I was really struggling with that. But now I've got the books in my hand, and each book has been like specifically purchased and exists in the real world, and I can hold it. It feels much more like I can just enjoy those books for like what they are. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I am really glad that you got into the Frida McFadden book because we found it on Vinted.
Yes, we did. Yeah,
and we bought a bunch. I wanted
Vinted
to.
is a great place to buy books.
It really is. We were looking at books on Vinted because I wanted to buy the Pumpkin Spice Cafe as a paperback book because I really enjoyed the Kindle version, and I barely ever do this, but I really felt like it was time for me to have the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, and ended up buying a load of thrillers for Alfie, which included The Handmaid.
Yeah, The Handmaid.
I started off the year strong with some books. I've also started a Goodreads account, so I can keep intact what I read. The first book I read this year was Hybrids by David Thorpe. It was a book I read when I was younger, and I remember forgetting about it and having to do that whole massive like look online deep dive trying to find out what the book was. The whole idea of the book is that some humans mutate into their technology counterparts. So if you use a mobile phone a lot, you're likely that your hand might mutate into a mobile phone, for example, but it can never be updated because it's, part of your body. And I found that book and I was really, really happy about it. Finally got around to reading it this year. However, unfortunately, I didn't enjoy it as much as I remembered enjoying it, so I gave that a 3 stars out of 5. But if you want something that you can sit down and read in like 1 or 2 sessions, it is like a young adult / teen / like sort of like for 13 to 17-year-olds, that kind of area. I thought that was a really good vibe. The books that I've just finished reading. Do you remember was it last month?
Yeah, maybe the worst book I've ever read.
We started reading A Deadly Education, finished it for the podcast, and there was definitely a little bit of hesitation from me to continue that book. But when I got to the end of it, I said to you in the podcast as well, I really want to continue reading it. I really want to see where it goes. So I picked up the second one, which Mike very kindly gifted to me. So thank you very much, Mike. And I really liked it at the end. So I continued reading the third one. The problem with that series is, and I could go on about it for ages, I would never recommend the Scholarman series to any single person. However, if you start it and you get even remotely invested in the characters, I think it's so good to end it. And I really liked the way the story turned out. I saw it coming, and I could really predict that last book. But the second one had the same problem that the first one did, which was it took a little while to get into it. and there's a lot of lore dumps. And I think the third one really worked on that. Also, one of my biggest problems with it, and I don't know if I said this in the podcast or I worked it out later, but the author uses a lot of English and Welsh slang, but it feels very American. The book feels very American. So that means that all of the sort of like idiosyncrasies of British speech felt slightly out of place. And I think it jarred me every single time I got to any of these things. The third book, I feel like if they didn't have a different editor, at that point the book series had been out for 2 years because it was one a year. And I really feel like someone stepped up their game and actually put the swear words and things that were English in the right places, or Welsh. And I really preferred the third book, and I think I feel very good for having finished the trilogy. And I also feel very good for having finished reading a trilogy. Considering last year I read, I think, 12 or 13 books. I think it was 12. Having not read a single book for 10 years or so. Now this year I've already read 14 books, including the podcast books, so 14 books in total. I'm really proud of myself for that. And just as a reminder, the books we've read this year, we started off with Quality Land, but we technically read that at the end of last year. Yeah. We've got The Whistling by Rebecca Netley, A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. We had Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry.
Yeah, that was very good.
What else did we have? I feel like I'm missing one.
Beach Read.
Oh, Beach Read by Emily Henry. I think that must be it.
Yeah, I think that is it.
All very, very good books. I actually rated Beach Read at 5 out of 5 stars because of that cozy, warm feeling. So I'm really happy about that. And one book that we read together over audio was The Graveyard Book.
Yeah, that was
by Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, I really liked that book. It was just very good. Just a very cozy young adult story, coming of age story. About a boy who grows up in a graveyard and all of his friends are ghosts. And Neil Gaiman has such a way of reading his own writing that is just so enticing. He's just as good a speaker as he is a writer. And all of the words that he uses, you can really tell when he reads them, sort of how they're supposed to be read.
You feel everything. Like, his reading it, I feel like, is one thing. Hearing him talk and say it and read it out loud, it just elevates the whole series.
Absolutely. And it's a great, like, multi-story story. One of my favorite things one of my favorite things in particularly in fantasy literature is how books can have like an overarching plot, but you don't really know what the overarching plot is, like, kind of until the end, because each smaller story kind of builds into this larger plot, which ultimately like comes to a conclusion at the end. It's Neil Gaiman on top form, like as he always is. So, yeah, nothing to hate about that book. That's an absolute 5-star book from me.
I rated it 5 stars as well. I thought that was so good. It was, I think, also the experience, because we listened to it on longer car trips, so we have that nostalgia now of like the two of us sitting there listening to the book.
Yeah,
and I really liked it. And as you say, they were sort of, I think there were maybe 7 or 8 chapters. I don't know how many chapters there were, but each chapter was significantly long and did have a self-contained story to it, which was just really nice. And they were broken up in the audiobook by Dance Macabre. So we just had those classical pieces of music in between.
And they were really long as well.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Like
they
really
were like
long pieces
a minute and
of
a
music,
half, 2 minutes. But it was very interesting, and I did like that experience.
Me too.
I think out of the podcast books, Beach Read aside, because that was a sort of like a special.
Yeah.
I think that Legends and Lattes is, I think it's one of my favourite books I've read this year, full stop.
Legends and Lattes is one of my favourite books I've ever read in my life.
Yeah,
I think.
So good. I rated it 4 stars. I think you might have done also during the podcast.
Yeah, I think I did.
I think it's just so cozy. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. I highly recommend picking that one up if you haven't already. I decided that I was going to go into, I think we went into Waterstones.
Yeah.
And there was a book that I picked up, and I really like sort of like situational romance books. So I like it when it's 2 people in a place, not like a forced proximity kind of thing, kind of loosely that, I suppose. That's one of the
more
tropes.
of a happenstance.
Yeah, more of a happenstance. And one of the books that I picked up and read was called Beach Rivals, and I was like, oh, another beach book. But it's by Georgie Tilney, I think is her name. It looks like an Emily Henry book. It's very similar to the covers. of the UK Emily Henry books. I picked it up, and it's about two people, a man and a woman, who go to Bali to run a bookstore together. The bookstore owner in Bali, has basically hired these two people to go and run these bookstores. And it's up to them to sort of bring it back to life, breathe life into it. And it's just a really cozy, warm story. And you can just imagine being there on the beach, and it's nice. I wouldn't say the only criticism I had of this book, which is not the whole reason it was 4 stars, I rated it, because it's not quite brilliant. Like, it's not quite 5 stars. It's very run of the mill romance, like one thing to another thing to another thing. Nothing's unexpected.
No.
But it is very good and very cozy, especially if you like that genre. But the thing that I didn't love about it is called Beach Rivals. But the 2 lead characters, who are supposed to be the beach rivals, never really had a rivalry. They just sort of didn't like each other.
I would also say the same beach read, though, because very little of beach read actually happens on the beach.
That's so true.
It all happens inside.
That is so, so true. So there's definitely a little bit of misnomers going on for the titles.
Beach lies.
Beach lies.
Yeah, I'll call it the beach lies subgenre of romance. Lies about the beach.
Lies about the beach. Speaking of lies about the beach, but not really, you've just finished another book, and we picked this one up in a Forbidden Planet. We took a risk on it for 99p.
Yeah, so my favourite video game of all time is Resident Evil 2, the remake. So we saw this novelisation of that game in Forbidden Planet, and it was only 99p, and you very kindly were like, well, I have to buy it, because I know how much he loves that. So if you know anything about the Resident Evil series as a whole, the video games, the movies, the books, you know it's just like cheesy B-movie, zombie, corporate, scientific horror. And this book is all of those things in one. It is one of the cheesiest books I've ever read, but it captures the heart of the Resident Evil series and the sense of style that Resident Evil has, and how Resident Evil just happens in this such a strange, like, other parallel universe to our own. There's nothing realistic about the Resident Evil series at all, and it really leans into that, both in the books and the video games and the movies. And I really enjoyed it for that fact. I found it to be very very fast paced, which was nice. And even for somebody, I'm so familiar with that story, they even had like characterizations, particularly of the two like human antagonists in the story, were very different to how they are in the video games, which I thought was really, really cool. So I got a lot out of it for that reason. And ultimately, I think even if you don't really like Resident Evil, if you're just looking for like schlocky, pulpy horror, it's very, very good. I wouldn't give it probably higher than a 3-star, because it is that particular brand of fiction, and that particular brand of style definitely has a glass ceiling on it. But it has that culty potential, and I'd read that book again over and over. I thought it was very, very good. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed that.
I'm really glad you did. It was just, we just took a risk on it, really.
Definitely, yeah.
Though I think there were like 2 or 3 titles there, and we just went, well, we know this one's probably going to be okay, so we'll pick it up.
Yeah. But there's like 11 books in that series, so yeah, very good.
I've been really getting into my romance. So I tend to pick up books on Amazon when they're 99p, because I am a Kindle reader.
Yeah.
So I tend to pick them up if they're 99p. One of those books was Tex Miller is Dead. I've rated it 4 stars. And looking back, I don't know if I'd still give it 4 stars, but I like to rate my books just after I finish them on feeling. And that clearly gave me like a bit of a cozy vibe. And actually, I did really enjoy it. And I think I read it in almost a day. So I really liked that. The other quick read I picked up, which wasn't actually that quick, but I, again, read it quite fast, was The Tea Shop Witch, which is the first in quite a long series by Thora Bluestone. And that book, if you want a jump scare halfway through a book, that is the one to go for. I rated that 4 stars as well. That was quite cozy and warm, but it's one that if the sequels, if they go on sale on Amazon, I will pick them up and I'll read them 100%. And I've actually been thinking about it quite a lot, which is always a good thing. always a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
But I wouldn't jump to. I think it's like £2.30 at the moment, which is actually okay. I think it was like 3 or 4.99 beforehand, so I've been waiting for it to go down. And if this is as far as it will go down, I might still have to pick it up
Sure.
because I really liked it. But again, it's just one of those, like, I don't really feel there's much pressure to read it. It's just kind of I have fallen in love with saying a frothy book. Just frothy. It's just like, it's a bit of nothing, but it's a bit of something. Like, it's got just substance, but at the same time, if I never read it, my life wouldn't be changed.
But you enjoy the process.
I enjoy it. I think I actually read this book in the bath, which is a very interesting thing because I never take baths.
You've never mentioned this book to me, so.
Did I not?
No.
Oh.
I don't remember.
Yes, I did. I
you?
did, but I can't tell you what it is on the podcast because I told you about the spoiler. It was like a really big thing that happened, and I was like, I cannot believe this has just happened. So I'll have to catch you up afterwards. But if you want a book that has a jump scare in the middle, that is the one for you. Did you read any books this year so far that you thought were particularly good?
Yeah, I think for me it would be Legends and Lattes for one. Graveyard Book, definitely. That would probably be it in terms of like the books that I thought were like very, very good. I feel bad about Handmaid, but Handmaid is so specific.
Yeah.
And like you pick that book up in an airport, you know. So yeah, I can't give it that high just because of what it is. It was alright.
So you've read some Brandon Sanderson this year?
Yeah, yes, I did finish the first Mistborn book. The problem that I have with Brandon Sanderson, and you know what I'm like. I'm in this like horrible place with my reading at the moment where I want to read big fantasy books, but I just can't quite get into them. I really want to, like, the community around epic fantasy is so amazing and the people around it are so passionate, and I like want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
But it's just there's something in all of that I just can't quite get over the hump. So I listened to the whole of Mistborn, and that took me a long time. Like, that took me, I would say, it was a 25-hour audiobook, and it took me about 3 or 4 months to get through the whole thing. And I remember finishing that. I got back from the gym and I sat down and I was awake and it was really early in the morning. I was like, oh, you know, I'm just going to sit and just listen to the rest of this. And I listened to the last like 2 hours of it, and then it finished. And I thought, well, that's the end of that then. And I literally until you just said Brandon Sanderson, that book hadn't even come into my mind that I'd finished it. And so I don't know. It's hard. I'm in a spot about reading because every time I go away from fantasy, I think, well, maybe this will be the one that gets me into it. Maybe this will be the thing. But none of them have so far. And I'm currently reading Prince of Thorns, which is a fantasy series. I can't remember the author, but
Mark Lawrence.
Thank you. Which is dark fantasy. Honestly, if this doesn't do it, none of them will, and I will just sell the rest of my fantasy books and just be like, "This is not my cup of tea," because it is stopping me reading a lot of other things. So yeah, so the thing with Sanderson is he is incredible at what he does, but I don't know if that particular thing is. But you know, I haven't given up on it yet. I'm still trying. I think it's very telling that right up until you said you've read some Brandon Sanderson, I'd completely forgotten that I'd listened to Mistborn and was but the books that come to my head when I think about like what I've read are the more local stories, the thrillers, the horrors, the things like Legends and Lattes, which have a lot more slice of life and heart about them. And yeah, so stay tuned, you know. In 6 months, you might come back to this podcast and I've been like, yeah, I've read the whole of the Stormlight Archive and I'm caught up on Game of Thrones. And I'll be like, I love this. But we'll have to see.
One of the best books I read this year was a book that we were going to read on the podcast, but we opted for something else instead. It might have been Deadly Education. We went over this book. And that was A Short Stay in Hell. It's about 170 pages or something like that. And it's so very good, and I would highly recommend to everyone who wants to read anything, if you want a book to get you back into reading, pick up A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck.
Mhm.
It's so good. I can't quite tell you how good it is, but I rated it 5 stars straight off the bat. I think that's probably the strongest 5-star I've read this year.
Mhm.
What happens is, to just sort of like lightly scrape the surface of the book, when you die, you go to hell, but all of the hells that you go to are like a personal hell for you and other people who'd fit into that category. So for the main character and similar people to him, he was like a big bookie person. You can't say a big bookie, that's a gambler, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
someone who was like big into books. Our main character was a book lover, and he goes to this library, and you're not allowed to escape from this hell, because you can escape, they give you a chance, you can escape, until you find the book that is written with your life story in perfect English.
Mhm.
Now, that seems like it could be quite easy,
Yeah.
but this library is floors and floors and floors and
Infinite, I
floors.
would imagine.
You don't age.
Yeah.
When you go into this place, you are the age that you are when you're like sort of in your peak physical form. So I think our main character is like in his 20s in this book, and he tries to find these books, and there's like, they've been searching. There are other people here in this hell who have been searching for years and years and years and years before him, like hundreds of years. And the only kind of word that we found in a book is literally a single word. Everything else is jumbled text.
Yeah.
So this is like how impossible this situation is. And our main character goes through so many different things, like falling in love and having relationships with other characters, whether they're good or bad. And it's just like this whole massive journey that is one of the only novellas that I've ever read that I wish it was longer, or I want there to be a part 2. But I'm also very happy to keep guessing. In some ways, I kind of feel like it's my personal hell to not know
what's happening.
what happens next. So please read that if you haven't already. I know Mike's read it. If you have read it as well, please let us know in the comments of the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. But I really highly recommend that, and I think you're going to really like that too.
Yeah, when I get around to it.
We also have had... I've had a bit of a childhood renaissance.
Yes.
I've wanted to read some of my books from my childhood, and that kind of started with hybrids, but I've also started reading through a series of unfortunate events. I've read the first 2. I read each
You
of
read
them...
the second one in like an hour yesterday.
Yeah, I sat down and I read The Reptile Room, which is the second one. I think it took me about an hour and a quarter. So they're very quick books to go through. When I was younger, I remember reading them over and over and over again. So I probably am not needing to take in as much information because it's all there anyway.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that. And I similarly read A Bad Beginning in one sitting. So I highly recommend those if you just want something to dive into and follow the story. I will say, from what I remember of the TV show, they're very close to the TV show and the movie as well. The movie's a bit weird because there are 13 books in this series, sorry, and the movie's the first 3 with Jim Carrey. I think it's brilliantly done, but obviously there was a need to redo it, and the series with Neil Patrick Harris is each episode or each story is like a 2-part episode. They're very good. They are very good. They are wonderful books. They are a wonderful TV show, wonderful film. Highly recommend if you haven't already and you'd like to get into that. I also then, after that, I read The Recruit, which is part of the Cherub series, and I really liked that. I think I picked that up for 99p, and I was like, okay, blast from the past, time to get into that and see what it's all about. And I really liked it the second time round as well. I've got the... Annoyingly, I don't know why this annoys me so much, I then bought the 3rd and 4th book in the series because they went to 99p as well. And then the second one is still at like $2.99, but the trilogy, the first 3, went on sale for 99p on the Kindle store. So I've ended up getting 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4.
Right.
Which is fine. It's not a problem. It just annoys me that on Kindle I have to skip to the bit where it's like number 2, like right in the middle, read that, and then I can either read through to 3. I don't really like box set books on Kindle. They make me feel like I haven't really finished the book because I am someone who likes to look at the percentage.
Yes.
which is definitely
which
a
is
big
one of
problem.
the things that I hated about my Kindle.
Your Kindle is annoying actually
Mm.
because when you've got Alfie's Kindle, or now my Kindle, it says, I don't know if this is a thing for everyone, I think it's the 2022 model, but it says what percentage you're on, which I love, but it also says the page number, and you can't seem to have one without the
One
other.
or the other, yeah.
And I don't like seeing the page number. I don't know why. It makes me so much more aware of like
Yeah, you have to have
the fact I'm
page. You have
reading.
to have the page number, or how long you've got left in the chapter,
Yeah,
or
and I
how
hate
long you've got
that.
left in the book.
How does it know?
It doesn't. It's a lie.
Especially because I will be reading on my Kindle and then I'll put it down without turning it off, and then you'll talk to me about something for like
Yeah.
10 minutes,
And then it's
and then
like
I'll go
you've
back
got
to it.
70 hours left in this
Yeah,
book.
exactly. So I don't love that about the Kindles, but I do love reading some of these books from my childhood all over again. I'm currently reading Eve of Man by Giovanna Fletcher and Tom Fletcher, which is something I think it escaped me because I think it came out in like 2008, 2009, something like that. And I read Billy and Me by Giovanna Fletcher when I was younger, but this one has always sort of like been where I wasn't really reading anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm really enjoying it so far, but I'm only about 4 chapters in. And the premise of that is we are in a dystopian world where the last woman was born 50 years ago. And all of the women, that's like everyone else who's been born, have been men. I actually spoke about this in my stream today, and someone pointed out that there was a book called Why the Last Man. It was like a comic book series, and it seems to be the reversed. So there was just women and then one man. And I don't know whether it was inspired by it or just sort of like two ideas that were happening at the same time.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to see where the story goes. I think there's like a trilogy, but I don't really know. What about you? What else have you read this year?
The last one that I wanted to talk about was I listened to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is one of my favourite stories of all time. It is, you could argue, it's like the birth of British Gothic horror. Particularly, well, it's probably not the birth, but like it's in that first wave of Gothic horror that came out of the Victorian times, and it is such an incredible story, especially for that time. One of the things that I love about horror, and I've always loved about horror, is horror gives you a snapshot into what people were afraid of that particular time. So there's always that historical reference with horror. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you haven't read it, what are you doing? This is a classic.
I haven't read it.
Yeah, you should though. It's very, very good. But I understand like a lot of people, skip over the classics. But for an audiobook that was only about 2.5 hours long, that I listened to in a day, I think the novel is only like 102 pages. It is just fabulous. It is written with such style and such, I don't know, flamboyance almost, and drama, and the way that certain things are described by today's standards, certain horrific things that are talked about in that book are so, like, it's so plain and just not frightening at all. But if you think about it from in the context of a Victorian reader who's never really come across anything like this before, you can only imagine like how terrifying it was, like the description of a man's face, like literally turning into another man's face in front of them, and like his hands growing and the hair like coming out of the back of his hands. It's so good. And I don't know, I'll always love Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think because it is such an inspiration to so much horror that came after it, particularly like with regards to body horror and like psychological horror. It had so much to offer back then. And I think a lot of people tend to disregard it because it's often a book that you learn about in school. And so people kind of experience it at school and they're like, oh, I don't ever want to go back to that because I hated school and all that stuff, which I totally get. But I think if you're like a literary historian, or you're interested in the history of literature, particularly British literature and particularly horror literature, there's so much to be got out of reading and rereading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as the full title is. And it's companion novel as well. It's not really a companion novel, like it's not officially the companion novel, but the Picture of Dorian Gray, like the themes of those two books are like basically the exact same, and they both tell a wonderful story about what it was like to be a gentleman in the Victorian times and how much of yourself you had to repress in public and how you had to appear, but how like deep down all of these horrible things that come with being a human, all the temptation and all the vice, it's still there. And what happens if you take away the mask and you take away the if you not take away the mask. In the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you give them a mask, but in Dorian and Gray it's a bit different. But if you take away the consequence of what can happen if you do indulge that side of yourself as a human, what then becomes of you? And it's just fascinating. It's so good. And not even just for the academic point, the way that it's written and the way that it's read, particularly in the audiobook that I listened to, and unfortunately I've forgotten who read it because he was absolutely brilliant. He sounded like Brian Cox, but it wasn't Brian Cox. It was just fantastic, and I would recommend to anyone who has never read it that they should definitely, when they are ready, go and read Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because it is just fabulous.
Did you put it on your Goodreads at all?
Yeah, I did, but I put it as the book itself, not the
audio book.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a shame. If we find it, I'll leave it linked in the description.
Yeah.
But I know you really liked it, which is just
it's
amazing.
so good. Yeah, it's just so good.
In terms of what's coming up next, I think that's pretty much all of the books I've read, but I've probably missed a couple here and there.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're really looking forward to reading?
I have a lot of books in my TBR, which are a lot less intense than a lot of the stuff that I've been reading recently. Is this mine?
It's yours, yeah.
Yeah. So, The Way of All Flesh, which you bought me, I'm very excited for because that is right up my alley. I think I do fall into a trap. I think I trap myself and I see the cover for a historical novel or I see the cover for a fantasy novel. I pick it up immediately because I'm like, oh yeah, that's the thing that I keep telling myself that I should be reading. But really the things that I'm most excited for are Old Evils. I'm really excited for. That looks like a really good detective story. Lost Girls looks really good. And there's this other book which I will find. I've been talking to you about for ages. It's this book that I started on audio, and it was on Kindle Unlimited about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I cannot remember for the life of me what it's called or who the author is, but I didn't finish the audiobook, and I cannot stop thinking about it, and I'm so desperate to remember or figure out what happened. It starts off with this woman who has basically changed her identity and gone to live on a ranch in maybe Canada or maybe just like New Hampshire or Montana or something in North America to run away from a stalker. And this particular stalker has just gotten out of prison. He's looking for her again. And this on the ranch, the patriarch of that particular family is on his deathbed, and his children come to the ranch to basically sort out his affairs and like what's going to happen, and she's there, and that's so you've got the one plot of the succession sort of side of it, and then you've got this other plot of this stalker coming to get this woman. And I don't know what the story's called. I've googled it, I've done everything I can to try and find it, and I can't find it anywhere. So if you do know what that is, please tell me, because I'm desperate to go back and read the rest of that. Yeah, apart from that, mostly what I'm just looking forward to is just reading all these little unknown books that are like that you get in charity shops, these little things that no one's heard of. No, they aren't high stakes, they're just little books that of writers who are just out there in the world, hope or have been out there in the world, but they've written these books that nobody's ever talked about, but I get to read them, so I like that aspect of it. What about you?
Me, I've got loads of stuff. I basically, the way I use my Goodreads as well is I've added all of my Kindle books onto it.
Yeah.
So that I can be like, right, here's everything that I am reading at the moment.
Is my Goodreads linked with my Kindle?
I don't think so. It's
It looks like it is.
But... So my want to read list is like 271 pages or something like that. Sorry, 271 books or something like that. One thing that is really on my list that I want to read is Vampirates, which is another book I loved, series I loved growing up as a child. So I really want to get back into that. I think that the Vampire series was my ultimate favourite, and they made it into a stage musical, which I did not know about until it had already happened. And that was when I was an adult, so that's not great. I really want to reread Blind Faith by Ben Elton, which has always been my favourite book, and I just want to make sure it is still my favourite book. But there's also like a couple of bits that I've picked up recently. Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. I want to read that. I saw that in a charity shop and it looks really interesting. And I did flick through it after I came home and realised it's one of those books that doesn't have speech marks. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it, but it's only short. So hopefully I'll be able to get through it. I really want to read The Fifth Wave. I picked that up as well by Rick Yancey. And I think that's going to be a really good one. I'm hoping so. I do have a playlist. A playlist? I have a shelf on my Goodreads where it's the things that I do want to read next. I really want to read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang.
Yeah.
Kuang? I don't know how to say their name. I think you've got a couple of their books.
So I've got her Poppy War series, which is another fantasy series. I've got that, and then she also did Babel, which is a lot of people talking about. So
yeah, that sounds like I do want to read those. Sarah Goodwin wrote Stranded, which was my favorite book of last year, and there's another book that I've bought called The Resort, which I need to read. I hope it's just as good as Stranded, if not better. There's a book called Nowhere to Land, which we pitched on the podcast, I think. And if we didn't,
we did. Yeah, we did pitch that. I remember.
That was the one about it's all taking place in a plane that they can't land, and it just sounds like a very interesting experience. I really hope to find even more books that are situational romance books as well. I have one called Love Me Do by Lindsay Kelk that I bought that I am excited to read, but I don't know if I'm going to enjoy it. And Just Haven't Met You Yet by Sophie Cousins, which has a really interesting blurb. Essentially, it's of a woman who she comes across in some way a suitcase. Maybe it's a mixed up suitcase between her and this person, but she goes through the suitcase and realizes this person's her soulmate because they've got like so many interests in common. So I just think that sounds really interesting. But aside from that, I'm going to finish reading Eve of Man and go from there. That is definitely something I'm interested in. I've been recommended a bunch of books as well today on stream. So if you have any recommendations for things you've heard what we like to read, let us know in the comments. That would be amazing.
Definitely.
And is there anything else you want to say to encourage people who might be willing to pick up a book but don't know quite where to start?
Start small. Don't jump in. Don't go hard in the deep dives and the big books. Start with the easy things that you can pick up in Asda or a charity shop. And anyone who tells you don't judge a book by its cover, they're lying. Pick up a cover that looks interesting to you because that's the first thing that you're going to enjoy about it. So pick up a book and just read it, man. Like, it's absolutely fine. I think there's a lot of shame at the moment across social media about genres and what it's like to be a real reader and what you should be reading if you're a real reader. Don't listen to anyone else. Just do what you want and read what you like, because reading in itself is so fun. So.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are the Paperback Possibility Podcast, and do you know what that means?
We're going to do a possibility paperback thing.
At the end of every podcast, Alfie and I take it in turns to show each other 2 books, and we're like, hey, which one of these sounds the best? What do you want to read? And Alfie has come up with 2 books this time round that we're going to have a look at and see if they tickle my fantasy. So what is the first one, Alfie?
So the first one is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Again, a classic sci-fi horror. The blurb goes, Robert Neville is the last living man on Earth, but he is not alone. Every other man, woman and child on the planet has become a vampire, and they are hungry for Neville's blood. By day, he is the hunter, stalking the undead through the ruins of civilization. By night, he barricades himself in his home and prays for the dawn. How long can one man survive like this? Obviously, a classic that inspired a pretty good movie.
I love I Am Legend. I've never read the book, but the film was one of my favourites.
Yeah, so excited that has that potential. And the other one is The Haunting of Steyr House by Amy Cross, who we still don't know if that's a collective, because Amy Cross pumps out about 4,000 books a year. So the blurb for this one goes, when Parker and her mother move into Steyr House, they immediately notice that something's not quite right. They have no key for the garage, and anytime they try to get inside, they end up distracted. A mysterious black cat patrols the property, seemingly waiting for something or someone. Strange noises at night hint at a hidden presence that lurks in the shadows. Soon Parker discovers that Steyr House has many mysteries. As she gets to know a local historian from the nearby village, she starts to uncover a horrifying web of lies, secrets, and deaths, all connected to someone who lived in the house more than a century earlier. But is the past willing to stay buried, or is there some truth to the rumours of ghostly encounters and witchcraft?
I can't lie to you, Alfie. They both seem really good.
Yeah, definitely.
And I really want to read both. They're both shorter books. You've picked shorter books this time around.
Definitely.
So The Haunting of Steyr House is 188 pages. The I Am Legend is 175 pages.
Basically the same.
I really want to read I Am Legend. I really do, and I've wanted to for a long time. But I have seen the film before, and I am somewhat knowledgeable about the story. Which makes me really want to go for The Haunting of Steyr House. It is a book in a trilogy.
Yeah, the first one.
The first book in the trilogy, yeah. And that, I don't know if that makes it better or worse, because you know me, I do prefer my standalone books.
Sure, yeah.
But it is only a quick read. Both of them are. So I think I'd like to go for the Amy Cross book. This one is 20 in British horror fiction, 34 in occult horror on the Kindle store, and 46 in occult horror in books.
Occult horror is my favourite.
So that's going to be very, very interesting. The Kindle book is currently on sale at 99p, and the paperback is £9.99. So if you want to read that, pick it up. Maybe find it in a charity shop, maybe find it on Vinted.
Absolutely.
Please do read along with us. And the next episode of the podcast will be coming out on July 22nd, if all goes to plan, where we will be discussing The Haunting of Steyr House by Amy Cross. Thank you for bringing those to us.
Thank you.
And letting us choose which book we're going to read today. Are you reading any good books? Please do let us know. And which one should we be reading? Thank you so much for listening to the podcast or watching it. You can watch this on YouTube or Spotify, depending on what you would prefer. Or you can listen to it on Spotify. You can't watch it on Spotify. Not yet.
Not yet.
But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you all so, so much. Alfie, I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast.
Of course.
And talking to me about books today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Always is.
And I have been Ashleigh.
I've been Alfie.
And thank you so much for listening to the Paperback Possibility Podcast. We will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.